There we are. Let me start again. President Mr. Sivakumaran, members of the committee, particularly Dr. Vela, who was kind enough to get up early in the morning and give me a lift to the venue, and also who invited me to be with you. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here with you for your New Year, annual New Year, annual New Year lunch. Clearly, I must say I didn't quite expect such a large gathering, but I think it's testament to the credibility that Scot has established since, I believe, 1977. So it's been a very long time that Scot has played a very important role in supporting vulnerable people in the north and the east of Sri Lanka. I'm going to start my remarks by giving a quick snapshot of the economic conditions in Sri Lanka right now. Then I'll go on to talk about why Sri Lanka has fallen behind from the position it enjoyed at the time of independence. At the time of independence, Sri Lanka in Asia was second only to Japan on almost any socio-economic indicator. We have fallen well behind now. I'll try to explain why we have fallen behind. A very complex causality. I'll come to that in a minute. But let me first give this snapshot. Those of you who would have seen on your TV photographs, TV pictures in London, in the first quarter of 2022, some of the scenes in Sri Lanka at that time. There were power cuts of 13 hours a day. People were queuing for days for fuel and gas. Essential medicines were running short, and the country was on the verge of a humanitarian disaster. That humanitarian disaster was averted to a significant extent because India, as the first responder, delivered assistance of over $4 billion. That helped to avert, in my view, things were much worse than actually happened. What happened was very, very traumatic for the people who were living in Sri Lanka at the time, but it would have been even worse, much worse, but for the intervention of India at that time. So having got through that, where we are now is actually extremely impressive. The economy has stabilized more than anybody expected. The IMF, the Sri Lanka's development partners, I think anybody you ask, they'll say this stabilization has been impressive. The inflation, which was as high as 70%, has actually now come down to disinflation. There is about 1.5% disinflation, partly because the electricity prices were reduced a significant amount, but the central bank's inflation target is 5%, and they will slowly get back to that by the end of the year. So inflation has been beaten, and the governor, Dr. Nandalal Veerasimha, and his team need to be highly commended for the very resolute and decisive monetary policy that they conducted over the last 2 years. Then, on the day Sri Lanka declared a debt standstill, which is a polite way of saying Sri Lanka defaulted. Sri Lanka defaulted on the 12th of April, 2022. The external reserves of the country usable external reserves of the country amounted to just 24 million US dollars. That for a country which has an import bill of about 20 billion and which has debt servicing payments of about 6 billion per year. Reserves were 25 million. That was the extent to which the reserves had run down in the country. And that's what actually compelled the default. Reserves are now back up to 6 billion. So from 25 million to 6 billion over the last 3 years. So inflation down, reserves down, and growth in 2024 was 5%. For 2 years, there was actually a 10% contraction in growth. In 2022, growth was minus 7.2%, I think, and 2023 it was 2 point something. So altogether, 10% contraction in 2 years. Last year, it was 5%, but I will later on explain to you that we mustn't be lulled into a false sense of security as far as growth is concerned. But so almost any indicator you look at, things have improved and improved very significantly. So can we sit back and be complacent that the country is back? And I will, in my comments, as I go on, will point out that the situation is still extremely fragile and there's still a lot to do. Okay, so I said that at independence, we were second to Japan in Asia on any indicator. As late as 1965, Sri Lanka's per capita income was higher than Singapore and South Korea, 65. In the subsequent, 60 years, Singapore's per capita income is 86,000 US dollars. Korea's per capita income is 33,000 US dollars. Our income is just 4,000. So you can see how far behind we have fallen. So why is this? Of course, the causality is extremely complex. There have been political issues, social issues. We've had the 27-year ethnic conflict. We've had two insurrections, there will be insurrections in the south, and lots of things with the tsunami, pandemic, various things that the country has gone through. But on the economic front, as I said, very important political and social causes, but on the economic front, I would submit there are two kind of clusters of issues that one can identify which has held us back. One is that we've had repeated bouts of macroeconomic stress. For the non-economists, macroeconomic stress manifests itself as high inflation and a severe balance of payments problem and pressure on the currency. And the fact that we've had this happening again and again is evidenced by the fact that we have had 17 IMF programs. From 1965, Sri Lanka has gone to the IMF 17 times, which the only other country in the Asia-Pacific region which comes anywhere near this is Pakistan. In fact, when I was in the central bank for 3.5 years, and twice a year we used to go to Washington for meetings, for the whole membership. There were so-called spring meetings and annual meetings. And the Asia-Pacific department of the IMF would have a session. And they'd have a slide saying, Asia-Pacific region countries under an IMF program. And for all but 6 months of the 3.5 years, Sri Lanka was the only country in Asia that had an IMF program. Pakistan, because they didn't want to be with India, actually were in another region, in the West Asia region. But think of the whole of Asia and the Pacific. Only Sri Lanka, for most of the 3.5 years I was at, had an IMF program. So this it's a mixture of mismanagement in terms of wrong policies, is a corruption, and also exogenous shocks like oil price movements, and even sometimes droughts and floods and things like that. But much of the problems were self-inflicted. So why have we had these repeating bouts of macroeconomic stress? The root cause, most of the time, has been the government's budget. Excessive budget deficits pumped lots of excess aggregate demand into the system. It overheats the economy. And we have these excessive budgets under all political parties. We've had this because of a toxic combination of one, populist politics. All the parties have indulged in populist politics and have been very ready to give away handouts, and an entrenched entitlement culture amongst the people. Now, we are very ready to blame the politicians. The people in Sri Lanka are very ready to blame the politicians, and the politicians deserve a lot of blame. But equally, the people also have an entrenched entitlement culture, where they are constantly demanding all these handouts and things like that, which cannot be afforded by the government. So the government, this budget deficit, puts money into the system, creates too much demand in relation to goods and services in the system. It then fuels inflation, and some of that excess demand goes into imports, and with a balance of payments problem as well. Then this poor fiscal performance is compounded, amplified by what technically you call fiscal dominance in monetary policy. And by that I mean the central bank, when the budget is overextended, is expected to raise interest rates and lean into the loose fiscal policy by tightening monetary policy. Instead, in Sri Lanka, what the central bank has consistently done is they finance the deficit by printing money. So that clearly puts more excess aggregate demand in the system, compounds the problem. In addition to that, in order to get cheap money for the government suppresses interest rates. That, of course, leads to additional excess credit creation. Again, money is being pumped into the system. And in the end, you end up with high inflation and imports being too high in relation to the availability of foreign exchange, and the currency comes under pressure. So all this has been a repeating cycle. Now, after all this time, finally, there are strict fiscal rules. The government is expected to run a primary surplus of 2.3% of gross domestic product. What does that mean? For the current year, revenue minus total expenditure minus interest payments. You'd set interest payments like revenue minus expenditure must be surplus to the extent of 2.3% of GDP. So by that, what you're doing is you're not adding to your debt. You're meeting the current year's expenditure with current year's revenue, and you're setting aside 2.3% to pay back the earlier debt which is built up. So that is now embedded in law. There is a Fiscal Management Act passed by Parliament which has a surplus of 2.3% of GDP embedded in it for the primary surplus. In addition, revenue is embedded at 15% of GDP. And primary expenditure, that is total expenditure minus interest payments, at 13%. So there are these laws now which are embedded, there are these targets which are embedded in an Act of Parliament, the Public Finance Management Act. And now for the central bank, there is a new Central Bank Act. The central bank cannot lend to the government, except in very exceptional circumstances like a natural disaster, or pandemic, or something very, very exceptional. But the new central bank law stops it from lending to the government. So you can't have this old practice of the government selling treasury bills to the central bank and just printing money. So you can no longer print money. Equally, this measure of artificially bringing down interest rates to find cheap money for the government, that cannot also be done, because there is a regime for monetary policy which has been embedded into the new Central Bank Act. And that is flexible inflation targeting that is pursued by many countries around the world. There is an inflation target. For Sri Lanka, it's 5% plus minus 2. And basically the regime entails a data-dependent, forward-looking process, and the forecasting and modeling capacity of the central bank has been strengthened. So it is a purely technical exercise. You can't administratively set interest rates to help the government, as was done in the past. So that problem has also been resolved. So fiscal rules, the central bank can't do the things that it did earlier to compound the problem. And another problem in the old days was the exchange rate. When the excess demand started sucking in too many imports in relation to the dollars we had at our disposal, The currency obviously comes under pressure, but now there is a high import component in our basic consumption value. So fuel, wheat, lots of things, essential fertilizer are all imported. So it's politically very difficult to depreciate the currency. So what the government does to make up for the shortage of dollars in the market, it feeds its own reserves into the market. So the reserves which usually are needed to pay back debt, etc., are used up to make up for the shortage of dollars in the market. Now, this is a really stupid thing because you end up with a double whammy. And we did this again and again, the same playbook again and again. And what used to happen was, central bank used to feed dollars into the market, but it doesn't solve the problem because basically you have an imbalance between the demand and supply of dollars in the foreign exchange market. So at the end what happens is, you've depleted your reserves, and in the end you have to depreciate the currency anyway. So it's a double whammy. And this playbook also was repeated. Now Einstein said that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing again and again and expect different outcomes. Now that is what we did for many years. Fortunately now, I think we have finally got a new paradigm for macroeconomic management. So tightened fiscal rule under Public Finance Management Act. The central bank not being able to indulge in fiscal forbearance, as they call it, in its monetary policy, and having a flexible exchange rate which is reflective of the supply-demand dynamics in the foreign exchange market. And these things are now embedded in law. Actually, in the time we were I was in the central bank from 2016 to 2019, we tried to do these things. And we made some progress, particularly in the time when the late Mangala Samaraweera was finance minister. He got it, and he actually ran some primary surpluses in the budget. You know, after 1954, up to last year, there have been only 5 years when the government has had a primary surplus in its budget. Every other year, it has had to borrow more and more. So, Samaraweera in 2017 and 2018 got a primary surplus. So we were beginning to turn things around. And the central bank took a decision, the monetary board took a decision not to print money, all that. But then, just with a directive from the President of the Secretariat, everything was thrown out the window when the government changed in December 2019. So that's why it's so important that this time, it is actually embedded in laws. That these changes, which we were trying to introduce in 2016 to 2019, have now been put into acts of parliament. So hopefully, we now have a new paradigm. And we have addressed that one big problem we have of repeated macroeconomic stress in the Sri Lankan economy. And what in practical terms that means, interest rates will be more stable, exchange rate will be more stable, it will be much easier for businesses to plan. It's great, you can have a longer term vision in terms of your business activity. All that is hopefully something that is going to be new for us and very positive going forward. So that side of the problem, I said there were two big problems. So the repeating macro stress, provided the laws are not changed. Now, I think it is incumbent upon the whole population in Sri Lanka to protect those laws. Now, I remember when I was in the central bank, trying to convince people that these things are good, trying to get the business community to back us in what we were trying to do. But they kept quiet. They didn't want to get involved, because basically they preferred to keep quiet and cut their own deals with the government and not get involved in criticizing the government in any way. So that mentality has to change, because they've had first-hand experience of what happens when the macro goes badly wrong. So hopefully there will be much greater interest amongst the business community, amongst the think tanks, amongst civil society, to protect this new paradigm in macroeconomic management. So that's one problem. Hopefully we've got to a point where we are in a better place. On the second challenge, which I'm going to talk about, we are hardly we've made hardly any progress. We are really very close to the beginning rather than the destination. And that challenge is to build a growth model that gives us sustained non-inflationary growth based on export transformation. It is not rocket science. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Several countries in Asia have used this playbook and have had great success. J.R. Award in 1978 said Sri Lanka must export or perish. That was fine. Very limited progress was made in actual policies to pursue that. But some progress, to be fair, some progress was made. But from about 2005 onwards, we have fast forwarded in the wrong direction. We have gone backwards. Our exports of goods and services together, which amounted to about 35% of our gross domestic product, have come down to about 17 or 18, basically half. In terms of openness of the economy, the metric used for whether the economy is open or not, and that is whether to what degree it's integrated with the world economy, that metric is tradable, which is imports plus exports as a percent of GDP. That was 75% around 2005. It has come down now to about 40. So those two key metrics, which showed the export dynamism of the economy, the openness of the economy. Now, some people will say, now the openness is very dangerous, why are we doing it? And now, particularly in this new Trumpian context, it's not such a good thing. But if you have a market of 23 million, based on a per capita income of 4,000, you cannot get the growth you require for combating poverty and for keeping people's expectations met without selling in the external market. You have to sell in the global market if you are to get the kind of 5% growth that you need to achieve. So, and you have to be competitive to do that. Sri Lanka basically built walls around itself. Those walls got higher in the last 25 years. And then in the end we have this terrible crisis which kind of exposed all the things that we've been doing wrong. So what do we need to do to crack this problem? As I said, the first problem, the macro problem, we resolved. But this problem, you need basically to have export transformation defined as diversifying and expanding our export basket, that is the products we export. We have a narrow export basket, and we need to expand and diversify our export destinations. Now this Trump tariff shock was potentially very dangerous for us because our export basket is very narrow and 25% of our exports go to the US. So this is where we need to diversify products, diversify markets. And there are a series of things that we need to do. They are well known, but we have to get down and do it. But let me quickly run through them. One is we have para-tariffs. One is the ports and airport levy, and two are cessnas. Now what this does is, by having these para-tariffs, we lock ourselves out of the most dynamic component of the international trading system. In the last 20-25 years, it is global supply chains which have basically driven the growth in international trade. Now, so the process is something comes in, you do your little bit, and you send it out. Now, if you put a para-tariff in the middle of that, you become uncompetitive. Because of that, we have negligible presence in the global supply chain, which have been the most dynamic part of the international trading system. Intermediate exports, that is basically exports where something comes in and we do a bit and it goes out, is less than 5% for Sri Lanka in its total exports. Malaysia, Thailand, etc., more than 50%. So they are plugged into international supply chains, tenfold over than we are. And we have locked ourselves out with these kind of policies. So one thing is to take these para-tariffs off. The successive governments now, the last 2-3 governments are committed to doing it under the IMF program. But I think one should accelerate and get that done. And also in the last 20 years, the tariffs have gone up, and it's a very untidy structure. Various businesses have gone and got deals done to protect their businesses. And we have a terribly untidy tariff structure which needs to be rationalized. That needs to be done quickly. And the third thing is trade agreements. As I said, 23 million is no market to have 5% growth on a sustained basis, 5% plus. So we need that everybody is signing trade agreements, because the WTO has basically become almost defunct. Nothing is happening there in terms of multilateral trade liberalization. So you have to do your deals, bilateral deals. Sri Lanka has had a serious problem. It's not in our DNA to do these deals because we are very suspicious of anybody coming in. And therefore, we signed an agreement with Singapore, we haven't implemented it. We have signed an agreement with Thailand, we haven't really implemented it yet. And we have a free trade agreement with India, which we were trying to deepen and broaden, and we were not able to do that. It's rather strange that this an island, which was basically for millennia a trading hub in the middle of the Indian Ocean, is so suspicious of anybody from outside. It's in our DNA now. And yet, other than the post-independence period, this kind of suspicion of anything from outside is not something that characterizes our history. Maybe 450 years of foreign rule has kind of disturbed our equilibrium, and we have this suspicion. But we have, excluded ourselves on many opportunities by this innate suspicion of dealing with the rest of the world. We need to get over that. If we are, I'll come for more things about that in a minute. So there are other things. Establish international trade office, pass the Customs Act, implement the national single window. I won't go into detail. It's very well known what has to be done to get exports going. Now we have to implement. Now the changes made to improve the macroeconomic policy making, a lot of that was also known, but the laws got passed after the crisis. The crisis provided an opportunity to get these things done. Similarly, the Trump shocks now, trade shocks, is an opportunity to get the trade agenda sorted out. I hope the government will take advantage of it to get some of these things I've been talking about, to get our export performance up. So those are reforms to do with export expansion. But we also need to improve productivity in the economy through structural reforms. The potential growth rate of the Sri Lankan economy, which used to be 5%, right through the conflict period it grew close to 5%. But now it has come down to 3%. But 3% is not enough, one, to reverse the sharp increase in poverty that has happened in the last 3-4 years, and also to create enough surpluses in terms of foreign exchange in particular, to pay back our debt in full from 27-28. Until 27-28, the debt restructuring package that the government has been able to agree means that we are only paying interest. But from 27 onwards, we will have to start paying capital and interest. By that time, we need to build up sufficient reserves and to have sufficient export earning capacity to be able to pay back our capital and interest and finance our imports. So we have to get 5% growth onwards, from now onwards, ready. There has to be a laser-like focus on the export expansion agenda and on the structural reforms to improve productivity in the economy. Because, as I said, you have to go from potential 3 to potential 5. And these structural reforms have been very well known. For instance, the labor laws are archaic. Some of you may well have tried to go and get land to do business in Sri Lanka. It is almost impossible to get land. The government owns over 70% of the land. It's very difficult. You need to have reforms of the state-owned enterprises. You need to have the whole trade agenda I was talking about, to have a better investment climate, to clean up the investment climate, to have a one-stop shop for foreign investment, education, training, skills development. All these things we have known what to do for many years. In the 1980s, I was seconded from the central bank to the finance ministry. The late Mr. Ronnie DeMel was the finance minister, and I became his bag carrier, so I used to follow him around and listen to all his speeches. The things that he spoke about then are exactly the same things we are speaking about today. We have done very, very little, as I said, in the factor markets, land, labor, capital, all that, on investment, trade, education. Same thing, we've been talking about these things. It never gets done. So why, you have to ask yourself, because there are intelligent people in Sri Lanka, why is it that we've known what to do, but we haven't been able to get it done? So there are two reasons. One is these structural reforms have a fairly long gestation period. They are often more than one electoral cycle. So there isn't a real incentive for politicians to get them done, because the benefits tend to come after the next election. So they tend not to be very motivated. The second and more important thing is, these reforms, while they benefit the many, will find that a few people who are benefiting from this restricted system will be losers. And those people are politically very well connected. So they resist. Often they are businesses, but they are also sometimes trade unions. For instance, the Inland Revenue Department has blocked digitalization, because revenue has been a big problem for Sri Lanka. But Inland Revenue has blocked digitalization, which would have greatly improved tax administration. The customs have stopped a fully automated system, because they want to have face-to-face contact with the people so they can shake them down. So it's very difficult. So it's sometimes unions, sometimes businesses who want to protect their benefits, which would be eroded if kind of the protection that is currently built into the system is removed. Because by removing protection, you have more competition. And then you have better prices, better quality for the whole population. But those businesses which benefited from protection lose out. So this is, but one hopes that this NPP government has much less baggage in terms of its IOUs to businesses and other things. So I hope they will take more objective and technical positions and get some of these reforms done. To be fair, Ranil Wickremesinghe had some of these things in what he called the Economic Transformation Act, which was passed last year. So a number of these reforms are there. And President Andrakumara, in his position as finance minister in delivering the budget speech, said that he would implement this act with some amendments. So this Economic Transformation Act has a lot of these things, the structural reforms that need to be done. They need to have a laser-like focus on getting the export expansion done and getting productivity increased through these structural reforms. Otherwise, we are not going to be able, in 27-28, when we have to start repaying the debt in full, we may well have to go for another debt restructuring. And another debt restructuring means another IMF program and more austerity. The Sri Lankan people have been extraordinarily patient so far, because there have been very severe austerity imposed on them. Think about it. Whether it's the VAT and other taxes, whether it is electricity and fuel prices, very, very tough. But they have so far taken it. But if you say in 27-28, well, we have to have another round of debt restructuring and have another round of austerity, I don't see that flying. So that would be social and political problems. So we have to get this 5% going somehow. The lowest hanging fruit in terms of transforming our growth performance is greater integration with India. You know, it's tough. We have to do all these structural reforms, all the reforms we need to do. But even with that, the prospect really is we have a 4 trillion economy at our doorstep. It is growing at between 6 and 8%. The 5 southern, for the whole of India to grow at 6 or 8%, the 5 southern states must be growing at close to double digits. This is at our doorstep. Now, to try to understand the opportunity, you should look at what happened in East and Southeast Asia, when first Japan and then China had their growth surges. The countries in the region were able to plug into the supply chains that were being created through the growth of Japan and China, and they were all lifted up. This opportunity is now coming to India. India is growing fast, and now, particularly with the China Plus One strategy that is coming in, a lot of people are relocating to India. So, and India has this neighborhood first policy. Now, they have to walk the talk. There's no point in them saying that we have a neighborhood policy unless they really do walk the talk on that. They should do that. So, this is a real opportunity. Not only that, we've had proximity for years, forever, right? But infrastructure in both countries was very poor for a long time. So the transaction cost of doing business across the border was very high. But now infrastructure in both countries is improving. Railways, ports, airports are all improving in both countries. So transaction costs are coming down. So we really need to take advantage of that, plug into what's happening in India. Our businesses need to be very agile in looking for opportunities to do business in India. And of course, this visit that Prime Minister Modi had. One thing that seems to be there is there seems to be very strong personal chemistry between the Prime Minister of India and the President of Sri Lanka. Maybe it's a shared common background, whatever it is, but there really does seem genuine kind of, I suppose my son's generation would say good vibes between the two leaders. And that is something, again, we should try to take advantage of. There were 7 agreements signed when Prime Minister Modi visited. There is electricity grid connectivity, which would enable us to export power to India if we get our generation plans done. Then also, if we have, there is also Trincomalee being developed as an energy hub. There is a solar power plant in Trincomalee. And then there is, of course, a defense agreement as well, which has been controversial. So, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? 5 minutes, okay. Fine, let me just say something about poverty. Poverty has doubled. In 2019, 11.3% of the population lived below $3.75 per person per day. Now it is 25%. Another 10% are just one shot away from falling below the poverty line. So pretty much a third of the population is really on the poverty line or below. And as I said, things have doubled, like from 11% to 25% and another 10 just on the verge. And the UNDP they have a thing called the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. That looks at not only income poverty, but also access to education, health, vulnerability to natural disasters. Under that composite index, 55% are vulnerable. So this is not a happy situation. Malnutrition has increased, stunting and low weight amongst the under 5s has increased. So, this is why I say it is absolutely essential that we get 5% plus growth. We have to do it somehow. But we really are going to run now about the North and the East, because that's what a lot of you wanted me to hear. One thing we need to do is that, I must say one thing, something has happened which I never ever thought would happen in my lifetime. And that is to have 3 MPs returned from the Jaffna district, from a party which is based in the south. The NPP has 3 MPs from the Jaffna district. This is something which was unimaginable for me. I didn't think that would ever happen in my lifetime. This happened. I hope that reflects that over time there could be more trust, and that the central government can behave in a way that is more supportive of development in the North and the East. Certainly in terms of the rhetoric, this government has not used any divisive politics to gain power or to retain it. So I hope that's a real sea change in the overall landscape. And, equally I think the Tamil leadership now has to look at opportunities. Somehow we need to put suspicion aside. There are lots of reasons for being suspicious. But unless I keep telling people, look, China and Taiwan have a massive amount of trade and investment. Given the relationship between Taiwan, you just look at how much investment goes in the two directions, how much trade happens. Japan and China, Japan and Korea have a very troubled history. That doesn't stop them from doing billions of dollars of business. In our region, India and Pakistan still can't get things organized. In South Asia, we are far too emotional and just not pragmatic at all. And then we keep missing opportunities because of that. So we need to really be pragmatic, and equally, I think, both sides. The central government needs to be pragmatic, and it needs to put history to one side and rise above it. And equally, the people in the north and the east need to look for opportunities which are there to be grasped. And I think more and more opportunities are coming. We're beginning to see lots of investment coming in, some investment coming in. Some of the Tamil billionaires are doing business now in Sri Lanka. I hope that will continue and that will expand. And the other thing is, under this government, corruption has come down significantly. So people who have difficulty in dealing with Sri Lanka because of the amount of corruption that there was, I think you could, if you wanted to. I remember my late friend Ranjit Pillai was trying to set up a cardiology unit in Jaffna. First he was told to relocate it somewhere else. And there were all kinds of hassles about corruption and what have you. Hopefully those things, one thing I'm hearing from friends who work on the grassroots is that corruption has come down. The police is allowed to do its work properly. These are two important changes, and I hope they continue. And that again makes it a better investment climate to go and do business in the north and the east. And in terms of sectors, clearly agriculture, water needs to be sorted. There is, I think, a desalination ADB project. There is this River of China, River of Jaffna project that Mr. Almugam came up. The Indians had tried to look at it. I hope that progresses. And then fisheries, the harbors, the coal chain, and really to cut out the middleman. This is what needs to be done. And my good friend Radharatnam, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to help businesses in Jaffna, which have the scope to expand. He's going in with them to expand and increase economic activity and things like the coal chain for fisheries and basically good transport and storage for agriculture, etc. are needed. And of course IT is another sector, and tourism. I mean, having this time when we went to Sri Lanka, we did go around Jaffna, and I had forgotten what potential Jaffna has in terms of tourism. And so that's another area. So there are areas to invest in. People are investing, and we need to do it. So what do we need to do as a country? We need to first make sure we get the macros which has been sorted. We need to keep it in place, make sure that the laws are not eroded, and we should keep that macro policy, the new paradigm intact. We need to do export expansion in a focused way. We need to increase productivity in a laser-like focus on that. Growth comes with two sources. One is productivity improvement. The other is labor augmentation. When your population is increasing, you can put more and more people into the labor force, and that increases your growth. But now, in our case, we are aging. So we can't get growth through labor augmentation. So it has to be through productivity. You have innovation, and you have to have these structural reforms to increase the growth potential, the growth framework of the economy. So there's an even higher premium on getting these reforms done. So we need to get them done. So with that, let me say that the potential is there. And I must say, I'm encouraged by a number of things that this government has done. I hope they stay on track. And I hope if they do stay on track, all of us are willing to do our little bit to get the country moving forward. The whole country moving forward. Thank you.